Hello, I'm Andy Pavord, and I'm here to talk about the federal budget. Today's topic is the origin and first principles of the Office of Management and Budget. Now, the importance of this topic derives from the importance of the role of OMB in our government. And I'm going to just take a minute and read the mission statement from the last administration, from the Biden administration, because that gives you a sense of what the role of OMB is. The Office of Management and Budget serves the President of the United States in overseeing the implementation of his or her vision across the executive branch. OMB's mission is to assist the President in meeting policy, budget, management, and regulatory objectives and to fulfill the agency's statutory responsibilities. Now, this is the last administration's vision of the role of OMB, but I don't think the Trump administration will be that much different. There will still be the core idea that OMB is a staff agency that helps the president achieve his vision across the executive branch, because that's the role of OMB, to oversee the executive branch in 5 critical functions. And again, this is from the old version of omb.gov, and I'm sure the new administration will publish a new version soon. But these 5 core functions will probably stay pretty much the same. Budget development and execution, core function of OMB, but also the management of oversight of agency performance, asking the core question, are the agencies achieving what they're supposed to achieve? And then the efficiency of business functions such as procurement, financial management, and information technology. OMB will coordinate and review significant federal regulations to, again, ensure that they are consistent with the president's vision. The OMB clears and coordinates legislative and other materials, including agency testimony, again, to make sure that they're all consistent with the president's vision. And finally, the OMB clears presidential executive orders and memorandum to agency heads prior towards their issuance. So these are really critical functions, and I don't think the functions will change in the next 4 years, but there is considerable debate about how OMB will achieve these functions. How will it be organized? What is the role of the employees of OMB, and what its relationship is to the president? Those things may change. And so to inform that discussion about the role of OMB, we're going to take a step back. We're going to go back and look at the origins of OMB and the first principles of OMB. So the origins of OMB trace back to the crisis of the late 19th century. In the 1890s were an incredibly rough decade for the United States. First of all, there was economic instability. The Panic of 1893, 3 years after the McKinley tariffs, caused an immense economic hardship throughout the country. Then there was, during this decade, a lot of social conflict and chaos. There was chaos around Jim Crow laws. We forget how brutal and harsh Jim Crow laws were and the incredible violence that it took to enforce them, including mass lynchings. Then there was the rise of economic inequality. America had always had rich people, but now with the J.P. Morgan and the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, you had immense wealth that America had never seen before. Huge mansions and huge ostentatious displays of wealth became part of American life. And this was really upsetting to many people. And they labeled the robber barons, because how could anyone get such wealth honestly, was the thought. And then there was labor unrest. So with the rise of great organizations such as the steel factories and railroad cars and railroad productions, there was the rise of big industry led to labor unrest. An example of that is the Pullman strike of 1894, where 30 people were killed in riots and violence. And then there was immigration. For the first time in American history, literally millions of people came to America who did not speak our language, did not necessarily look like traditional Americans, and lived in very different ways. And this caused consternation and fear. And then there was the growth of cities. America had been a rural country of small towns and farmers, and now all of a sudden there were these huge cities filled with immigrants. This caused social conflict and chaos, and it caused fear. People were concerned about what is America going to be like. There was a sense that the country was spinning apart. And then there was the rise of great organizations, the great corporations, the labor movement, great unions with hundreds of thousands of members. And this led people to think about, as they feared the chaos, they looked to business leaders, the men who could organize large railroads, steel mills, oil production. These people like Rockefeller and Carnegie were viewed as the leaders that had the solution to the chaos of our society. The CEO became the model of leadership. And then there was the accounting, the idea that we need financial order, that for organization to succeed, it needed to have transparency, and accounting principles were brought to the United States through the English investment in American railroads, where the English said, if we're going to invest, we want to know how the money is spent. And so they brought accounting to the United States. And it is this accounting that led to the idea of the budget. Now, the response to the crisis of the 19th century was really threefold. But all the people who were concerned about this realized that there was a transition from the fear of executive tyranny, which was the traditional American fear, right? The fear of King George III. And so in the 19th century, the struggle over appropriations was about the struggle how to control the executive, to keep the executive on a tight leash, because executives were the threat to liberty. But the fear of the chaos and corruption in the late 19th century created a new vision of the executive, the idea that we need a strong executive to bring order to chaos. Now, the Americans had three basic responses to this crisis in the 19th century. First was the McKinley Republicans, and their basic idea was let the great corporations lead, that they're the efficient organizers of our society, and that what we really need to pursue is a policy of laissez-faire, let the markets sort things out. And this was grounded in a belief of social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest. But their core belief was that the system works, that the American society's economy and free markets will lead to the best results. Now, many Americans rejected that out of hand. The populists rooted in the West, where farmers were losing their farms due to lack of availability of funding through borrowing and high interest rates, they rejected this idea. And Woodrow Wilson's vision of the new freedom rejected this idea. What they said fundamentally was that the system is now broken, but it can be made to work by proper regulation. The problem with the system is people are cheating, monopolists and robber barons. And so what we need is better rules to better manage the system, and then things will work out. And that led Wilson and his new freedom to create things like the Federal Trade Commission. The third response, and this is where the idea of the budget comes from, is the progressives. And there they said that the solution to the chaos is a strong, powerful government guided by science, social science, to achieve social balance and solve problems. And this was the idea that we need a better system. Now, they're not revolutionaries, they're not socialists, they're not trying to overturn the system, but they want to use social science and expertise to create a better system. And the most important statement of this view was Herbert Crowley's The Promise of American Life. And here he said that we need Hamiltonian means to achieve Jeffersonian ends. So the inequality of American government in American society could no longer be resolved by the free market like Thomas Jefferson believed. Jefferson believed that the natural result of the workings of the free market is a rough equality in distribution of wealth. But Herbert Crowley said that no longer works. And so therefore you need Hamiltonian means, a strong government, a strong executive to go in and intervene in society, to build a society that will that will work, to use expertise to solve the social problems that our country faced. Now, the key part of the progressive response was the idea of a budget. Now, this idea came out of a group of reformers that started at the local level in New York City with the Municipal Bureau of Economic Research in New York City. I'm sorry, the New York Bureau of Municipal Research. Misspoke there a minute. This was a group of reformers who were trying to deal with the complexity of New York City, right? New York City was growing hugely. It was becoming a big government institution because they needed to do things like provide public education on a mass scale, to provide a police force, and to provide sewer and water. All these complex things required a big government, and New York City was having trouble managing that. And it was big business that recognized that they needed an efficient government to be able to thrive. So they funded research by social science experts like Frederick Cleveland and William Allen, people with PhDs from elite universities. And they studied the problem and came up with the idea of a budget. The budget would be the key tool for bringing order to New York City. And so and they were successful. They brought the idea of budget to New York City. It was viewed as a success, and it started to expand across the countries. More and more cities and states adopted the idea of a budget. And finally, they decided to bring it to the federal government. And Frederick Cleveland began to produce books and articles, and many other people that pushed the idea that the United States government should adopt a budget. And let's take a minute to look at what they meant by the term budget. A budget is used to mean a plan for financing an enterprise or government during a definite period. So the idea is it's a plan. It's not just an allocation of funding. It's a plan for what is going to happen during a period. And then a budget is prepared and submitted by a responsible executive. This transforms the idea of a president. In the 19th century, the president was relatively uninvolved in budget matters. In fact, there was no budget in the United States. What there was a series of appropriations bills where agencies sent the bills directly over to Congress. It might go through the Secretary of Treasury, but he just looked at them briefly and compiled them and sent them to Congress. So that led to chaos, and the president really wasn't that involved. But now we're saying that the budget is the responsibility of an executive, and of course that executive is the president. But how did you maintain democracy in the system, right? Because if you have an all-powerful president, isn't that creating a new king? The solution to that dilemma, the way to make sure that we still have democracy, is that the budget has to be submitted to a representative body for approval. It's the Congress that maintains our democracy because the president can propose a budget, but the Congress approves it. And therefore, the budget becomes the way of preserving democracy in a chaotic time. You have a president submit a budget to a Congress. So you have strong energy with a strong president submitting the budget, but you maintain democracy by keeping the ultimate control with the Congress. Now, this idea started floating before World War I, with the agitation, and there was hearings and there was studies, and it almost got passed during the Wilson administration, but Wilson vetoed a bill due to disagreements about where the Bureau of Budget would be placed. But it sort of stalled out when World War I happened, because when World War I started, it was all about winning the war, and there was massive spending. There were paid for by borrowing. There were huge deficits. And in many ways, it was extraordinarily successful. The United States built an army of over 1 million people, shipped it to France, where it played a decisive role in winning the war. But nevertheless, there was a perception that there was a lot of mismanagement in this process. So after the war, there was a desire to bring the government under control, to return to normalcy. Now, normalcy is the idea that government is small and limited, and it's small town values. Warren Harding, who became the Republican nominee in 1920, was from small town Ohio. He was a successful newspaper business person, and he campaigned on the promise of a return to normalcy. He was going to eliminate the budget deficits, pay down the debt, and importantly, he wanted to use business methods to improve government efficiency. And so they passed something called the Budget of Accounting Act of 1921 in the first year of the Harding administration. Now, this act had three key provisions. First, it mandated only the president can submit a budget request to Congress. It ended the practice of individual agencies submitting individual requests to Congress. But then it also created, and that's the topic of today's talk, the Bureau of Budget, to compile the president's budget request to Congress. Now, it was originally placed in the Treasury Department, but it was still viewed as the president's staff, and then moved to Treasury Department, from the Treasury Department to the Executive Office of the President in 1939, and then in 1970, it was reorganized and renamed the Office of Management and Budget. This act also created the General Accounting Act to set accounting and financial management standards for the federal government. So Congress put this in the legislative branch because they wanted to make sure that the president followed the appropriation laws. So now the President Harding had to figure out how to implement the Office of Bureau of the Budget. And he turned to Clarence G. Dawes to be the first director of the Bureau of Budget. Now, Clarence Dawes is an interesting figure. He kind of came from the Midwest. He was a lawyer who became a gas plant executive. Now, remember, natural gas is the new technology of the late 19th century that's bringing light to American homes, and light and heat, and really changing the way people live. It's like the Google industry of its day, the internet industry of day. It's cutting edge technology, and Clarence Dawes was a leader. And then he came into government under President McKinley when he was appointed comptroller of the currency in 1897. After his stint in government, he became a bank executive in Chicago and built a bank. But when World War I came along, he returned to military. He served in the military. Now, remember, America was building a massive new military force, and we didn't have like a strong general staff like the Germans had. So Clarence Dawes joined the United States Army and became head of the chief logistician of the American Expeditionary Force. He was General Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, chief logist. He became a general and got a lot of press, and he was considered a hero. He was considered to have done a great job. So he was a logical choice for President Harding to appoint as the first director of the Bureau of the Budget. Later on, he became vice president of the United States under Calvin Coolidge. So what did Clarence Dawes do when he became charged with this task of creating the Bureau of the Budget? Well, those of you who are involved in government, involved in industry, know of the concept of a kickoff, right? Where you bring everybody together and you articulate the plans and the vision for what you're going to achieve with a new organization. And that's exactly what Clarence Dawes did. And it's interesting, side note, he articulates and describes this in a very interesting book he published the first year of the budget of the United States, where he gives you a blow-by-blow account of the first year of the Bureau of the Budget. So what they did is they had a big meeting in the auditorium of the Department of Interior, and they brought all the key stakeholders. President Harding was there, Vice President Coolidge, members of the cabinet were there. There was the Joint Congressional Committee of Reorganization, so leaders from Congress. And then they brought the 500 leading executives from across the government to hear the vision for this new organization. Now, President Harding kicked it off. And look what he's doing here. The present administration of the federal government is committed to a period of economy and efficiency in government. I think you may have heard that before. Does that ring familiar? And he says the statement is not made with any thought of criticizing what has gone before. It is made with a new realization of the necessity of driving at the loose, unscientific expenditures of government. See, we're going to get order. We're going to bring order to government. And it says there is not a menace in the world today like that of the growing public indebtedness and mounting public expenditures. There has seemingly grown up an impression that the public treasuries are inexhaustible things, and with it a conviction that no efficiency and no economy are ever to be thought of in the public expense. We want to reverse these things. So President Harding is charging this new Bureau budget with playing a key role in reducing the debt. Eliminating the budget deficits, reducing the debt, and getting control of expenditures. That's the original role of OMB. And then Clarence Dawes, the new director, makes his opening statement. And he states that the president has said this is a business conference. So these are business people, Harding and Dawes, and their whole core belief is that they're going to bring business expertise to government, and that they're going to improve the administration and efficiency of government. He's there to talk to them as businessmen and part of a business administration. Government must be run like a business. That's a core statement of the origins of OMB. And who's in charge of this organization? The President of the United States, and his job is to act like the CEO of a corporation to ensure efficiency and effective administration. And then Dawes says that the Bureau of a Budget must have key principles. He says the permanent success of the budget system in the United States depends upon these principles, which at its inception, at the beginning, the origin of Bureau budget must be so firmly established, both as concepts, so everybody needs to believe in these ideas, and these ideas must become rules of action that will never, never hereafter be questioned in this administration or in any other. For the budget machinery must last as long as the republic. The budget, the idea, and remember the core ideas of the budget, a plan for a period of time submitted by a president to the Congress. This idea is key to the survival of our republic. And so then Clarence Dawes articulates the principles. The first principle, the Budget Bureau must be impartial, impersonal, and non-political. So the Bureau of Budget, as the staff to the president, must act like traditional staff, which means that they cannot be beholden to special interests. They cannot be beholden to particular people, and they cannot be political. This is the idea that only through an impartial, impersonal, and non-political staff can the functions of the Bureau of Budget be achieved. This is the core founding of the Bureau of Budget. The second principle is the director of the Bureau of Budget has no responsibility under the law save for the administration of his or own bureau, the Bureau of Budget. What does that mean? That the director of the Bureau of Budget, to do his staff function, can't be involved in specifically executing specific policies of the president. It's a staff role, not Secretary of Treasury, not Secretary of Agriculture. He can't be actively administering programs if he's going to be involved in the oversight of programs. The director of the Bureau of Budget is an advisor to the president and Congress in the matter of correcting business administration. So the role of the Bureau of Budget is effective business administration, not to actually implement programs. The director of budget, the third principle, in gathering information for the use of the president, acts for the president. So what does this mean? This means when the director of the Bureau of Budget, or today's OMB director, when he or she asks for information, the agencies have to give it to them. The Bureau of Budget needs to understand everything that's going on in government, and they need the information, and no cabinet head or department head can block that information. Then there's the fourth principle, is that in each department, now it's appointed by the cabinet head, but they will provide information to the director of the Budget Bureau, is this idea of a budget officer, that each agency will have a budget officer appointed by the agency head, but that budget officer will be the conduit of information from the agency to the Bureau of Budget. And then Clarence Dawes finishes up with the statement. In other words, gentlemen, the president is simply putting into effect for the first time in this country a condition which exists in any business corporation. In other words, we're bringing business ideas to the government. The president of a corporation bears responsibility for the whole institution. The president of the United States bears responsibility for everything that happens in the executive branch. And the president has the right to get the information where he pleases and from any source in the government, whether it is from the washerwoman scrubbing the floors of a department or the vice president of the United States. So this is a vision of the OMB, an impartial, impersonal, non-political OMB that serves as a staff to the president. Now, in the coming days, this vision, there will be debates about how this vision is implemented. And it's important, I think, to remember the original first principles of the Bureau of the Budget, now's OMB. So that's the conclusion of this video. I hope you come look at other videos in our series, and I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the budget channel, the federal budget channel. I'm sorry. If you would subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Federal Budget with Andy Pavord. I mangled that up pretty good, but I still hope you consider subscribing. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will look at others in this series. Thank you.